Good evening, everybody. We've hit 100 attendees and counting, so I think let's kick things off with this fascinating webinar, the UN's War on Israel, the campaign at the UN to delegitimize the Jewish state. We have some great speakers lined up, but without any further ado, it's my pleasure to give a word of welcome to introduce Anthony Rosman from the South African Zionist Federation. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, David. Very excited to host this session as the South African Zionist Federation at the start of the year, and what promises to be a very interesting year, possibly one of the most accelerated years in terms of the UN's war on Israel.
Anthony, may I ask, your camera doesn't seem to be on. Won't you quickly turn it on for us?
Sure. You check, my apologies. Ah, there we go. Sorry, my apologies. So yes, I think that this year promises to be an interesting year when it comes to the UN's stance on Israel and their war on Israel. And the Zionist Federation felt it very appropriate to host a session of this nature where we try and unpack what's happening with UN, what's happening with the delegitimization or the attempts to delegitimize Israel. And I think this will make for a very interesting discussion. And we have two very esteemed guests with us today. We have two people who have certainly have amazing credentials when it comes to the understanding of both the UN and Israel issues, as well as the relationship with South Africa. First, we have Anna BAYEFSKY, who Anna is a professor and director of the Touro Institute for Human Rights and Holocaust. She has taught at York University, the University of Ottawa Law Faculty, Columbia University Law, and has served with the Canadian delegation to the UN General Assembly from 1984 to 1989, as well as the Commission for Human Rights from 1993 to 1997. She also served on a number of delegations to the 1993 Vienna World Conference on Human Rights, in 1995 Beijing World Conference on Women, and the 2001 Durban Racism Conference, something that we would all be very familiar with here in South Africa. She was a member of the External Research Advisory Committee for the UN High Commission for Refugees from 1996 to 1998, and a member of the advisory panel of the UNDP on the UN Development Report for 2000. From 1998 to 2001, she worked in collaboration with the Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights on a review of the UN Human Rights Treaty system, authoring a major report on the reform of the treaty system in 2001. She's a member of the International Law Association Committee on Human Rights, Law and Practice, and editor-in-chief of the series Refugees and Human Rights, published by Brill. She holds a BA, MA, and LLB from the University of Toronto and a Master's in Literature from Oxford University, and is a barrister and solicitor on the Ontario Bar. An incredible CV, and we welcome you, Anne, to this discussion. And I think everyone is really looking forward to your insights. And then we have OLGA MESHOE, who is no stranger to the South African Jewish community, and who we are extremely grateful to have on our show. As some of you may know, OLGA is the Chief Executive Officer of DEISI International, and OLGA has certainly cut her teeth in terms of relations between Africa, South Africa, and Israel. She started off, or she had a career in law as a partner at Weber Wenzel. She then became a director to lead transformation in Transcend Corporate Advisors, where she advised non-profit organizations, government organizations, and the like in developing and implementing strategies for socio-economic development programs that were sustainable, held impact, and changed lives. OLGA is a very skilled MC and speaker, certainly has the gift of the gab, and has a long list of engagements as an MC and conference speaker. She has a very unique narrative on South Africa, Africa and Israel relations, a Christian narrative on the Christian mandate to stand with Israel. And she has spent many years engaging and delivering on this commitment. She is a regular speaker on the South African circuit and the circuit in the United States, having spoken at the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, Christians United for Israel, the World Jewish Congress, the Maccabi Task Force, Students Supporting Israel, and Hillels at campuses across the United States. She has also served as a guest speaker to Stand with Israel, Nigeria, the South African Zionist Federation, South Africa Friends of Israel, and other South African Jewish Christian Israel support organizations. Olga has also made an appearance on the Christian Broadcasting Network and JBS, formerly Shalom TV. Olga was named by Parable magazine in 2011 as one of the most influential young Christian leaders, and in 2016, Olga received the Jerusalem Award from the World Zionist Organization in recognition of her advocacy for Israel, as well as the work that she does with the South African Jewish community. She also serves as a regional director and educator for Club Z, and in between all of that, Olga does, she has a husband and a child, and serves obviously to her family. So we have two extremely well-esteemed guests, and we look forward to your engagement, and we welcome you to this platform, and welcome to everybody who has joined us this evening. As Benji said, please, if you have questions, post them in the group, and over to you. We look forward to hearing this discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony, for that very gracious introduction to both myself as well as Anne, to everybody that's joined in. Sawubona, Dumela, and good evening. It is always such a privilege to be with my home community. Let's get right into it with such an amazing expert and person, someone that I've been privileged to get to know over the last couple of months. In addition to that very long resume, Anne has done amazing things. She is also the president of Human Rights Voices. And first question for you. Now, it's no secret that the United Nations is anti-Israel. They make that very clear with regards to their bias. We see it from Israel being a standing agenda item on the agenda for meetings of the United Nations Human Rights Council. We see their anti-Israel bias in the number of ridiculous resolutions that condemn Israel for human rights abuses, never mind the fact that real abusers of human rights get a free pass. So this latest attack by the United Nations, why is this particular one so egregious?
Thank you very much, Olga, and thank you to the host of this program for inviting me. And I look forward to speaking to you and to answering the questions you might have. To be short about an introduction, I've been following the United Nations for almost 4 decades. And from that perspective, that I can tell you that this latest creation of the UN human rights system, human rights in quotation mark system, is the most egregious anti-Israel effort that's ever been launched. There was the Zionism as Racism resolution back in 1975, but that was later rescinded by the General Assembly, the first ever rescinding. But this is operationalized in a way which is dedicated to the destruction of a Jewish state through lethal politics. Now, I say that, let me give you a little bit of background as to what it is and why we're here. In last spring, there was an 11-day conflagration between Hamas and Israel because Hamas had launched approximately 4,300 rockets at Israel. Of course, it's grossly a war crime, since they were directed at the civilian population without distinction. And that it was a part of their attempted genocide, which they're openly committed in their charter itself. The response of the United Nations was to to convene an emergency session at the behest of Islamic states and the, in UN terms, so-called State of Palestine. And the Human Rights Council convenes this emergency session within days. You know, it takes years, if ever, to deal with grotesque human rights violations around the world. But when Israel had the audacity to fight back, the UN Human Rights Council holds an emergency session. And at that emergency session, even though by then there was already a ceasefire agreement, they adopt a resolution over the objection of every Western state. Not a single one voted for the resolution. And it creates a commission of inquiry with the broadest, most expensive mandate because of its longevity. Over time, it's in perpetuity in the history of the UN human rights system. It's unprecedented in its scope and its substance and so on. So basically, and what's particularly interesting about it is it didn't have virtually anything to do with the conflict that had just taken place. It then opened itself up to create an inquiry on all the root causes of the conflict ever, with no start date and no end date. And moreover, the UN would end up hiring, in order to fulfill this mandate, 18 full-time staff members of the Office of the High Commissioner. I mean, to give you an idea, you know, when they had a North Korea investigation, there was a third of the number of people that have now dedicated to Israel bashing. And so they created this mandate, this inquiry, and then they needed to appoint 3 people. So how did they do that? They turned around, and the Human Rights Council president, a Muslim, a diplomat from Fiji, who then appoints 3 individuals, the chairperson of whom is Nave Pillay, South African Nave Pillay. Now, Nave Pillay, as well as the other 2 people, are notorious for their anti-Israel bias. It's not a secret. Her speeches, her activism, both during her time as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights from 2008 to 2014, her time after that period in South Africa in particular, is well known, as is the record of the other 2 members. So I'll answer your questions, Olga. Perhaps you'd like to go into more detail about the 2 of them, but the bottom line is that here, this report, this inquiry is forever, permanently based at the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, composed to a great extent by lawyers who are essentially created an in-house law firm to victimize and to delegitimize and to criminalize Israel and Israelis when they act in self-defense. And so it's essentially a 4-part plan. Number 1, label Israel a racist state, guilty of apartheid. Number 2, because that's a crime against humanity, criminalize Israeli operations and self-defensive measures, take it to the International Criminal Court. 3, get the entire global community on board with boycott, divestments, and sanctions, BDS. And lastly, encourage a complete arms embargo on the state of Israel so that Israelis can't engage in self-defense. So here we are, months away from the first report in this massive global effort to, as I say, through lethal politics, destroy the state of Israel, a Jewish state.
And if we can just unpack some of what you've said. You spoke about the composition of the Commission of Inquiry. You spoke about how it came about, how it's staffed, the fact that its mandate is pretty much forever. In addition to what you've said, also from some of my readings, would you agree with me that the assessment of this particular inquiry is that it's a farce? There is a predetermined outcome that this inquiry is going to come to. And so even as you listed those 4 points of attack, like, what's the point? Is this real, or is this a waste of taxpayers' money who are paying taxes through their governments that are then going to be funding this? I mean, other than just being a farce, what is this?
Well, it's very sadly, it's not a farce. It is a pogrom. I've called it Pele's pogrom because she's leading the charge. Other ways of putting it are a star chamber, a witch hunt, a global witch hunt. And for far too long, the United Nations has been dismissed as it's not a serious organization. It falls terribly short from completing its mission of peace and security, obviously, and and protecting human rights, so that we don't have to take it too seriously. We can assume that other people will understand that this is biased, but that's not the way things have played out, and we do so at our peril. I said there's a foregone conclusion because the resolution itself, the mandate, indicates exactly what will transpire. As I said, it was supposed to be in the context of an emergency situation vis-a-vis Hamas rocket attacks and Israel's response, but instead the mandate talks about an April 13th date, they say, before and after April 13th. Well, I had to look up what that was because it didn't have anything directly to do with the conflict. And they said, but it turns out that it was the beginning of Ramadan, and an effort by Muslim Palestinians to, in fact, to riot and to claim, as has been true over history since the Mufti of Jerusalem back in the 20s, to claim that somehow Jews were preventing Muslims from access to prayer. Of course, the inverse is true. Between 1948 and 1967, when Jordan controlled the old city of Jerusalem, Jewish gravestones were used for latrines, for stone pathways. There was no access of any Jew to the holiest site of the temple, the destruction of the Second Temple and the wall. Similarly, Christians have access to holy sites and freedom of worship has been protected through Israel, but not when, in fact, Arab and Muslim Palestinians and Jordanians had greater control. So the facts are clearly the inverse of what the UN is saying, but to start this pogrom with Ramadan and then to say there are no temporal restrictions, because the point is to revisit the creation of the Jewish state and to condemn it as somehow racist in and of itself. So the dangers cannot be overestimated. The time for us to do something about it is now. Also, of course, since the International Criminal Court and its effort to criminalize Israel's actions is of serious danger, because it changes the subject from the offender to the defender, it really the letting it go on without a response would be a terrible mistake. And we are all called upon to do something about it.
Thank you for clarifying the fact that it's not a farce. It's a witch hunt. It's a pogrom that requires our urgent response. And I have a question for you on that. But before I ask you that particular question, as you've already alluded to in relation to the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in the 1920s and just various other accusations that have happened over the years, false accusations, the manipulation of context, truth is something that unfortunately is common as it pertains to the state of Israel. And one of the accusations, the false accusations, is the libel that Israel is an apartheid state. And you're speaking to a community that is very familiar with apartheid, non-whites in particular, having suffered through and understand its brutality. Please, can you take us through the history of the use of this libel that Israel is an apartheid state at the United Nations and how it's been weaponized as an agenda against the state of Israel?
Well, it began, the apartheid lie began as long ago as the late 60s, early 70s. And of course, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Zionism as racism resolution. And then the Commission on Human Rights had two standing agenda items about two states, which were allegedly the most egregious states in the world, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and Israel. And there were world conferences of the United Nations, which adopted the General Assembly's resolution that Zionism is racism throughout the 70s and 80s. And, but then South Africa overthrew apartheid, and the Israel was left as the on the UN human rights agenda. Now, in 1991, the General Assembly rescinded the Zionism as racism appalling lie, which is, after all, to suggest that the only peoples on earth who have the self-determination of the only peoples on earth to be called racist are Jews. So this was a renunciation of the very raison d'etre of self-determination that the United Nations purports to represent. So it was rescinded. So then Israel's enemies looked around to continue the racism lie. And since they came up with the Durban formula, there was, as many of our listeners will be well aware, a global anti-racism conference held in Durban, South Africa in 2001. And at this conference, there was grotesque anti-Semitism all around. I was a representative of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. We had to go to the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, to meet, to have certain kosher meals and to think about what was going on. We held, like other NGOs, a session on anti-Semitism, which was the only one of all the so-called victims groups that was broken up by a screaming mob yelling, "You are killers, you are killers." We were told by the Durban police force, the South African police force, to vacate the JCC because a mob of marchers was coming close to us, and we were in mortal danger. So, and when in the end days of the NGOs adopted this declaration claiming Israel was an apartheid state, et cetera, the Jewish community members that were there, including myself, had to be immediately accompanied off the grounds, the meeting grounds, because we were in physical danger. So that was the environment of Durban. In that context, where the human rights representatives included Fidel Castro and Yasser Arafat, The declaration said that Palestinians were victims of Israeli racism. The only country on earth that was supposedly racist was named in the Durban Declaration is the State of Israel. Now, it was at the time we were able to draw attention to the grotesque anti-Semitism, but 9/11 happened 3 days later, and I was actually in New York 3 days later, and I went immediately from Durban to move to the United States from Canada, and I witnessed 9/11, and anybody who saw the hate at Durban and the destruction of 9/11 couldn't help but connect the dots. This is not about speech for its own sake. This is speech directly connected to violence and terror. And so what happened after that? Nave Pillay became High Commissioner. She was from Durban, South Africa. And she took it upon herself to resurrect, as the mayor of Durban told her when she was appointed, resurrect the good name of Durban. She made it her calling. It was her number one task that she took upon herself. So she hosted and she created 2 subsequent Durban conferences, Durban 2 in 2009 and Durban 3 in 2011. And both of those UN meetings reaffirmed the Durban mantra. So that's what, and Nave Pillay herself held a news conference, which is available on the internet, where she said, of course, the Palestinian paragraphs have been reaffirmed. So it wasn't a secret. We knew what she was about. And then what happened? So during her time in office, there was the 2008 and 2009 conflict. Palestinians were, Hamas again was engaged in rocket attacks on Israelis at the end of 2008, 2009, gave rise to the Goldstone Report, another South African. And Goldstone came up with a report which said that Israel was deliberately targeting civilians. It's a blood libel. Now, subsequently, Goldstone rescinded that, said he shouldn't have said it, and he wouldn't have said it if he was asked to do it, to do so today. And what did Nave Pillay do? She actually went on the offense, supporting the original allegation. And then she spent her time in 2014. Again, all information available on the web, proving, or alleging that Israel was deliberately targeting women and children, the innocent. And so, that it is nothing short of mind-boggling that this is the UN has rules for inquiries. Number 1, impartiality. Every expert appointed must be impartial. They must be independent. They must be independence, impartiality, and I'll think of the other one. It's almost, the impartiality is enough. But the thing is, in these requirements, the Nave Pillay obviously doesn't satisfy any of these criteria, and yet she is heading this inquiry now. So I think that what's important to understand is, I should say, I know what the other one was, objectivity. Can you imagine that? Objectivity, having already decided that Israel is engaged and has done all of the various things that this inquiry is set to so-called investigate. So, having said that, we know what's going to happen, but what can we do about it? Here we have a situation where the outcome is clear. We could write it right now. I don't want to preempt you, but I think what we have to ask is, given who's heading it, the mandate, the way it was created, the context, the environment, the wording of what the inquiry is tasked to do, we know that this is Israel's in imminent danger, real danger. of delegitimization through this apartheid lie. And to answer your question, it was Pele who made the racism, the apartheid lie, the centerpiece of her time in office, and who continued to champion it after the fact. So we moved seamlessly from 75 to the Durban conference in 2001, to Nave Pillay, Durban 2 and 3, and her appointment to lead the charge in 2021.
Listening to you speak, it's easy for somebody to become quite disheartened, especially South Africans, when you recognize how our history and our experience by virtue of apartheid has been used against Israel, but also how a South African and together with other South Africans have actually spearheaded the continued anti-Israel hate, and particularly with regards to this agenda, the Commission of Inquiry. And also, as our audience will know, how our government has unfortunately been at the forefront of wanting Israel to be removed as an observer at the African Union. With all of these various things where we see South Africa taking a prominent role in the anti-Israel agenda, even though the very vast majority of ordinary South Africans are not anti-Israel. And what can we do? What practically can we do in relation to this Commission of Inquiry, which you've already mentioned, is a witch hunt, is egregious, is going to have implications politically for Israel that we are yet to see? Is there really any hope? And if there is, please take us through the steps that we can do to come against this.
The answer is an emphatic yes. There is something we can do, and we should do. And the Commission of Inquiry, so-called, the Inquisition, has called for submissions. And what we need to do is to make a submission. Submissions in the thousands and in the hundreds of thousands, in the millions. But the point is that each and every one of you, your groups, your organizations, your voice matters. And we cannot leave it for a situation where Pillay and Chris Sidoti and the other member from Australia and from India have the last word. They throw up their hands and they say, well, we didn't hear anything else. We didn't know any better. We didn't know, to obscenely, to refer back to the Holocaust. We can't let this "we didn't know, we had no idea" excuse be used anymore. And this is the time to make sure that the facts are out there. Submissions need to be made not because we think that Pillay and company will be convinced not to be anti-Semitic, not to delegitimize a Jewish state, not to lie about Israel's intention in defending itself through blood libels, not because we don't anticipate that whatever we do say will be twisted, ignored, taken out of context, but because we're appealing to the court of public opinion. We need to delegitimize the delegitimizers. That's their goal. Our goal should be to tell the truth, to make the facts available to the UN and to whether they want to listen to them or not, to be able to say that we gave them the information that they turned around and ignored and twisted out of context, to be able to reach media and ordinary people who are open-minded and want to hear what the actual facts. So if I may, I have set up in my website, which is, I think we'll be putting it online. It's www.humanrightsvoices.org. That's the homepage, which changes every day, except for the 4 boxes at the top. And if you go to Pillay's Pogrom at the top box, you will come to a series of things which are constantly being kept up to date, but are the background information for you, the mandate, the budget, etc., the membership. So those are the background. If anything I've said is in here, the articles are in here. Everything is repeated so that there's no problem with access, or you didn't take notes, or you didn't see it or hear it, or so on. You can share it. But then if you up bottom right, it says the word submissions. If you go to submissions, you can see that what we've created is a template. So here there is a template. You're not going to click on it right now because it's a Word document, and the guidelines are on the left, and they tell you any tips as to how to make submissions. But that template, all you have to do is fill it in. Now, if you scroll down, the question is, I'm going to stop at this right here. If you scroll down a little bit, it says the deadline. I'm going to go back to who should submit. People are so discouraged. You know, they think you have to be a great expert on history, on I don't know, a political scientist, a lawyer, a specialist of one kind or another. That's not true. It's important to understand that there are no pre-qualifications. You're a student, you're experiencing discrimination. You're a Christian, you visited Israel and had access under Israeli protection, Israeli guards. You're someone who's visited Israel and understands the apartheid lie and why it's a lie. You experienced apartheid truly, what it was, your family did, because the other side is attempting to appropriate your history, your experience, and you're the only ones, especially South Africans and perhaps other Africans or people of African descent who are able to speak with an authoritative voice. And so the deadline, when do you put in submission? The first report is out in June. It's the most important because it sets the stage for all the rest, even if they are in perpetuity. And there'll be another report to the General Assembly in the fall. But these are the important. If it's in June, they need to receive submissions in time where they have no excuse to say that they didn't get your submission in time, which means you should put it in by the end of February. You've really got about literally 3 to 4 weeks to make a submission for which they will have no excuse to say they couldn't have heard you should they have wanted to. So there is only one qualification. If you go down to the word topics, the inquiry requires that any submission be on one of 5 subject matters. Otherwise, they'll have an excuse to throw it out. Well, it wasn't on topic, it isn't within our jurisdiction, and so on. These 5 topics are absolute. There's nothing you do that has to do with anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or apartheid and what it really means that doesn't fall within the mandate. So don't be scared off by that. The first one, I've got 5 bullet points here, and I put them on the template, so it's very easy. Underlying root causes of recurrent tensions, instability, and protraction of the conflict, systematic discrimination and repression based on national, ethnic, racial, or religious identity. So, you know, there's nothing in here that doesn't count in terms of denying the truthfulness of the allegation that that Israel is somehow a racist state, as opposed to Hamas, which has a charter that is committed to genocide, a Palestinian authority that pays Palestinians to kill Jews. And one could go on and on. And if you look at bullet point number 3, it's really distressing. It says identification of those responsible. That's why I call it a star chamber. So from your point of view, who are you going to identify? Well, are you familiar with people that are that incite violence, that make false allegations of racism, that are inciters on campus, in your communities, in your parliaments, in the media? Every single one of those people can be identified as contributing to the protraction of the conflict, to the encouragement of repression, and on the basis of religious identity, on the basis of being a Jew, or for that matter, being a Christian and attempting to visit Israel and so on. So, or fulfill certain biblical scriptures. So if you scroll down from that, the question is where to send your submission, which again is in the template, so you don't have to be concerned, or the guidelines. But here, as you see where to send, there should be 3 places you send it. One is an email address, which I've given you from the UN. Number 2, they've asked for a submission on a cloud service, which they're using. And number 3 is to Human Rights Voices. Or if you have your own organizations, you can collect them yourself. Because what's terribly important is that when they ignore it, the world can't. We are going to put on the web names, with permission, of course, names and submissions, which will put the lie to any attempts to suggest that the other side wasn't making themselves heard, or didn't attempt to make themselves heard. But if you go to that cloud link, you can see it there. You just click on that, and we're not going to send anything in, but just look at it for a minute. Anonymous upload. This is what a Star Chamber is all about. You don't have to say who you are. You don't have to say what your expertise is. You could, in theory, where it calls for identification of those responsible, put a name in there, a person from your Zionist organization, a pastor from your church, a member of a committee that you find annoying, a person on campus attempting to stand up for the rights of Jewish students. Your name, every single one of you that's listening to this could have your name put in here anonymously and sent in to this witch hunt, this Star Chamber, with an accusation that you contribute to the protraction of the conflict, that you're an oppressor, that you're a repressor of Palestinian rights, so-called. So if we go back to, I think that's the end of it, but of the screen sharing, I mean, but what I'm trying to tell you is that to underestimate how vicious, lethal, destructive this campaign is, and the way it's been organized is a tremendous disservice, and terribly dangerous. And the voices, I would venture to say, that matter more than any other are South African voices. Your experience, your knowledge, your understanding, your firsthand statements are unlike any other. So I would encourage you to make your voices heard.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that. I do know that the organizers of the webinar will be sharing the link together with a recording of this so that we can all make sure that we do something. At this point in time, I'm going to hand over to somebody that I consider a friend, also somebody that I think the South African community is very blessed to have. He is the Director of Public Policy at the South African Zionist Federation, Mr. Benji Shulman, and he is going to facilitate for a couple of minutes Q&A, and then we'll hand over to 2 other important voices as we wrap up this webinar. Thank you again, Anne, for your selfless time.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you, Anne, for that very illuminating discussion on the very real risks that we face, not just as Israel, but world jury and supporters of Israel around the world. And I can say definitely that from the South African Zionist Federation side, we are going to be doing whatever we can to collect from organizations, from individuals, exactly this that you're asking, because I do think that it's vitally important. And as you say, as South Africans, we can't afford to have we can't afford to have apartheid really taken away from us, and we can't allow on our watch for South Africa to be used in this way, like it was done in Durban, and has been done even by our government, unfortunately. With that, let me get into the questions and talk to you about them. One of the questions which I have, and which I think perhaps you can clarify, is that when the UN is using the word apartheid, they often, you'll hear them use the word the crime of apartheid and not apartheid. And my understanding is that those are two different things, and that the UN is using them in sort of interchangeable ways, but they're actually different. And I wonder if you care to comment on how the notion of apartheid is being distorted in this process.
Well, honestly, I think that the two individuals who will join us shortly from South Africa are best placed to speak to that. But all I would say in general terms is that the UN, it's obvious there is no apartheid in Israel. In terms of, here you have a country where Arabs sit on the Supreme Court, are ambassadors and represent the state of Israel abroad voluntarily, if they wish to do so, can serve in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and who currently are a political party represented in the ruling governing coalition in Israel. I mean, the apartheid lie is so obviously illegitimate that and untruthful that the UN is putting itself, I should say, bending itself into knots to figure out in what shape or form can they make use of the word, which of course is rightly a trigger for our moral outrage, and direct that towards Israel. They want to do that because apartheid is a crime under the International Criminal Court. They want to haul Israelis before the International Criminal Court, because if you can criminalize the country, well, then the rest of it follows. Of course, it's illegitimate. An apartheid state is illegitimate. The people who run it are criminals. Boycott, divestments, and sanctions is the only solution, short of military victory, and an arms embargo will ensure Israel has no military victory. So that's the formula. That's why they're doing it. But the details as to why it's cultural and historical misrepresentation and appropriation is something that I think others should speak to.
Yeah, I think so. If I could just maybe add on to that question, in terms of the international law element of it, I understand that there is a convention against apartheid, and that there's the way that it's used there is a little bit different as well. Do you care to comment on that? Because my understanding is that part of it will be on that level.
There's no doubt that they're going to try to make to take law and invert it and twist it and make something up about which it doesn't say. So that's a very long legalistic discussion about why, but the bottom line is it was not, this is not, the circumstances are not satisfied in the case of Israel. And but absolutely no doubt they're trying to cast themselves as somehow anointed, a halo, the veil, as whatever you want to call it, of legalizing the conversation in a way which is clearly disputable and factually incorrect, legally and factually incorrect.
Could you also comment about the UNHCR and this process that's going to be ongoing? You mentioned the ICC on a couple of occasions.
UNHCR is the UN High Commission for Refugees.
Sorry, yes, the refugee. This is the Human Rights Council. I apologize. Yeah. How does this process connect with what we're seeing at the ICC? Because we have seen a lot of work around that as well. Is it likely to inform, and how long could that take?
Oh, absolutely. This is a setup. This is a clear process. You have Durban. You draft the International Criminal Court statute in a way which supposedly makes Israeli so-called settlements a violation of the Treaty of Rome, of the Rome Statute. So you have a law, in quotation marks, set up for a party of one, which is actually the inverse of what the rule of law is all about. Then you have the Durban spectacle, and Israel's a racist state. Then you have the apartheid in the Rome Statute, and you have a series of events. What's so sad about this is that Palestinians are actually being used as tools to destroy Israel. They're used as human pawns by their leadership. Many of them believe them. They voted Hamas in, but we know that there hasn't been an election in so-called state of Palestine for over a decade. So you have a situation where, and Palestinians are used as human shields by Hamas and Islamic Jihad and so on. So that what you have this sort of lineage between the effort to destroy the state of Israel from the minute of its birth in May 1948 and the understanding by the Palestinians and the enemies of Israel that the human rights was really their golden ticket, which was a way of, and especially the racism allegation. And so it's all connected. And in the last year, we saw Human Rights Watch come out with the apartheid lie. Then the 11-day war, which then gives rise to a resolution which is completely open-ended and has virtually nothing to do with the war, to Amnesty International's report, leading up to, there's going to be another report from a UN Special Rapporteur in March that will say the same thing, will parrot the same thing. And then the pièce de la résistance is Pele's report herself. So yeah, I mean, it's a setup, and that's how it's happening, and that's why we could write it today.
A number of people have asked a similar question, so I'm going to sort of take Mark and Colin and Anthony have all sort of asked a similar question. So I just want to sort of, I'm going to summarize it. If I get it wrong, guys, you're more than welcome to put in again. But a lot of questions about sort of the appointment of Pele as an objective in inverted commas person, and what you were talking about the fact that she's clearly not. So what kind of information or requirements would one need to not be there if her objectivity is so clearly limited in this context? And also inside the UN itself, is there not some way to object to this as a kind of procedural issue, or in some other way to slow the process down inside the institution? Because what you're asking is effectively us to be part of the process, but basically from the outside.
The answer is that the Human Rights Council is overseen by the General Assembly. The General Assembly could, in theory, do something about it, but they could have rejected the proposal for a commission of inquiry. They could have refused to fund it, for example. But the General Assembly is, I'll just go back to the Human Rights Council so you understand it, 47 members. The majority are the members of the African and Asian regional groups. There are 26 members, 13 among them, between them. That's the majority of the council. And the largest single, Islamic states, members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, are the majority of members of both the African and Asian regional groups. So they hold the balance of power at the Human Rights Council. So we have a Human Rights Council that consists of countries like China, Cuba, Libya, Qatar, Russia, Somalia, Venezuela. So that's who does human rights from the UN, the UN's top human rights body. Okay, so they produce this inquiry, this witch hunt, and so on. So it goes to the General Assembly. So then what happens? The General Assembly is composed of 193 countries. Approximately 119 of them are members of the so-called non-aligned movement, the NAM. The largest, in other words, the majority. The largest single voting bloc within the NAM is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the 56 member states of the OIC. So they, when it comes to these types of issues in the Middle East, control the NAM, which in turn controls the General Assembly. So no, there's no changing the General Assembly. And indeed, at the end of December, they voted to fund this inquiry. So from within the UN, you have these requirements. One could ask for a legal opinion, for example, from the legal advisor's office within the United Nations as to how these three people, this Nave Pillay and her compatriots, Milun Kotari from India and Chris Sidoti from Australia, how they satisfy, which they don't, the criteria for independence, impartiality. And if I'm to read it, the mandate holders must uphold the highest, I'm quoting it, the highest standards of impartiality, or of the council is bound to ensure criteria of paramount importance, independence, impartiality, and objectivity. So of course they don't satisfy it, but the truth is that and there have been appeals to the Secretary General to weigh in, but he doesn't control the General Assembly. He could weigh in on a moral level. He could express his shock and unhappiness that this pogrom is carrying on, but he would be prevailed upon not to do so. I don't think he has the moral gumption to say such a thing, but also the bottom line is he doesn't control the GA, so the General Assembly, so that it won't get defeated from the outside. What will defeat it is from the inside, and to prevail upon governments, democratic governments, to vote against its whatever it comes out with in both in June and in the General Assembly, because the report will be the first step, then there'll be a resolution accepting it, and so on and so forth.
Thank you for that explanation. It's very, very in-depth and quite a complicated issue. There is a number of questions as well about Israel's participation at the UN as a whole, and also you've mentioned governments sort of voting against this. So some questioners are asking, where do world governments stand on this? The US, Canada, etc. How are the governments stacking up when it comes to this particular issue?
Well, the vote in the Human Rights Council was 24 in favor, 9 against, and 14 abstentions. So the United States was not a member, otherwise it would have been 10 against. But you know, the 14 abstentions ought to be an embarrassment to countries like France, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, you know, countries who have a Holocaust record for which you think that they would recognize modern anti-Semitism, but they abstained. Nevertheless, the 24 in favor do not include a single Western democracy. So it went to the General Assembly. The General Assembly's vote was to fund it. The actual numbers of the funding vote was 125 against, sorry, Israel put forward an amendment to deny funding. That amendment failed. On Israel's side were 8 countries. Against the Israel amendment to defund were 125, and 34 abstained. Okay, so that tells you it's a math situation. Israel doesn't have the votes, and democratic countries don't have the courage, I'm going to put that politely, to do the right thing.
Okay, sorry, thank you. I'm just having a look at our time here. I've just asked my panelists, we do have time for one more question. From a perspective of the issue of apartheid and how it's applied again by these reports and all this sort of thing, there's a question of is there a distinction made between what happens in the territories in terms of these reports, or is this being targeted at Israel as a whole? How in terms of how we're seeing this thing being structured, people are wanting to know where the target is.
Yeah, that's a good question. This mandate is now completely open-ended, and even the title of it is to not the great. I mean, just get the exact phraseology. Well, in the bottom line is the so-called Palestinian occupied territory, including East Jerusalem, and in the state of Israel. So they purported to take jurisdiction over everything. And moreover, the Commission of Inquiry itself has actually has recently issued a guideline for people when they're making submissions, and I'm reading it. The Commission interprets the mandate as having no temporal restrictions. So they're going back to the beginning of the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel. That's their idea. It's the whole thing is completely open-ended. River to the sea is how they would put it, because it's really about the destruction of the state of Israel. However, from your point of view, you can turn that around. The Christians who are listening can turn it, and Jews for that matter, can talk about the biblical relationship between Israel, modern Israel, and Jerusalem, and so on, and the connection between Judaism and the Jewish land. Talk about who the real indigenous people are of the Jewish state. So they've opened it up, and we can respond in kind.
Wow, okay, thanks. And that is really, really insightful. And I think a lot of people have really had their minds opened this evening on the dangers and the threats of this. I am going to move on now to our second final speaker for the evening. We're very, very blessed to have on Pamela Ngubane. I noticed that there's a number of people on this panel with good South African political yichus. They come from famous families, and it's not just one family, there's a few. So Pam is part of that as well, which is great. But even apart from her family background, Pam is a historian and did her BA in Historical Studies at the University of Cape Town, and with a postgraduate certificate in education from WITS, and also an honors degree in Historical Studies from the University of Pretoria. And she is, as well as having 2 children and working in the education space, she is also the general manager of the South African Friends of Israel, and works to create partnerships between South Africans of all walks of life. and believes that great things can be achieved through friendship and partnership with the state of Israel. And I think we're definitely going to need some friendship and partnership here with this tonight. Pam, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Would you like to give us your perspective, please?
Okay, I just want to thank Anne and Olga for this very insightful conversation. We need to have more of these because people need to be educated and understand just how dire the situation is for Israel if we don't do something. And we, as SAFI, we're going to make sure that people get access to your website, access to the submission, and we're going to facilitate people's making these submissions. It's very important, you know. But, you know, I know from my own experience that Israel is not an apartheid state. You know, I would never have dreamed of seeing someone who looks like me as an ambassador for South Africa abroad. And yet Israel's diplomatic corps represents its entire demography, you know. So there's so many things that could be said about how it's just a libelous lie. But, you know, these are the things that we need to teach the South African people. And as a Christian, you know, Zionism, it falls in line with what the Bible says and what our mandate is as Christians. And, you know, it's a huge indictment on the Catholic Church and on the denominations that came from the Reformation, that anti-Semitism has emerged from these churches, you know, and that anti-Semitism has emerged as a Christian phenomenon. So as a Christian and to other Christians, we need to reclaim the narrative of Christianity. You know, Christian Zionism is not an option, it's biblical. It is in the Bible, you know, so I encourage everyone, read your Bible and see why the state of Israel needs to be supported, okay? And I mean, if we believe the Bible and we believe that the Lord God does not cast a shifting shadow, that he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So when he says he loves Israel forever, that he will bless Israel forever, that Israel is the apple of his eye, are we going to dispute with the Lord? He says in the book of Job how futile that is. So, and as a Christian, you know, I was born again very recently, and it was in that I actually started to learn about Israel. Before, I was completely oblivious. I thought I knew the Bible, I didn't. And, you know, simple things. The Lord Jesus Christ, he's called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Judah is the root word of Judaism, you know. So these are things that we need to think about seriously. This is not a game, you know, it's not optional, it's the truth. When we were born again, we were baptized in Christ, we joined this spiritual war that we are in, whether we like it or not, we're in it. So I just encourage everyone, guys, you know, put on the whole armor of God and stand. It's the evil day. It's time to put on that armor. And then, you know, just going back to the Christian contribution to anti-Semitism, anyone who says that the Jews killed Jesus, I would invite you to read Charles Wesley's hymn, Amazing Love, okay? He says about the Lord Jesus Christ, he died for us who caused his pain. Okay, we pursued him to death. That's who killed Jesus. It's the people who died, he died for. So if you've been born again in Christ, it is your iniquities that he bore on that cross. It is you who are healed by his stripes. That's who killed Jesus. All of us who have been reborn again in him. So we need to also think seriously about those who preach replacement theology. the Lord, as we said, he doesn't change. So can we just seriously question these things? As Christians, we've let a lot of things slide. We've let a lot of things slide. We've let a lot of bad theologies come in. We've let a lot of ideas that minimize the Jewish people and Israel come into our theology. And I don't know why. Maybe it's a misguided attempt to minimize the need for faith and obedience, maybe, But Paul is very clear in the book, in this letter to the Romans. The Jews are the root. They are the tree. We are the wild olive branch that's been grafted onto the tree. And the Bible is very clear that it is actually through the Jews that we have our faith in Christ. So as a Christian Zionist, I am calling on all Christians who are not Christian Zionists to examine the Bible and be truthful about what it says about Israel and the Jewish people. And I would also just like to thank all the Christian Zionists who have kept this fire burning. It's people like you who have allowed people like me to learn the truth about Israel. And so I thank you very much. Olga, I thank your dad, and I thank you for the work you've done in this regard. And like I said, we need to put on the whole armor of God. The day is evil. And, what is happening at the United Nations is evil. When we see evil, we tend to ignore it because we can't understand it. We can't rationalize it. Why? Why would anyone do something so disruptive? Doesn't make any sense. And so the mind just puts it on the shelf and says, well, I can't understand it, so I'm not going to deal with it. But we have to deal with it. We have to confront it. As illogical as it is, we have to just make a point of standing. And how do we stand? We join organizations that are standing. There's a lot of organizations that are standing. The South African Zionist Federation is able to link you to a lot of organizations, and I'd encourage all of you to go to their websites, go to Olga's website, Anne's website, and let's join up, guys. They strengthen numbers. And one of the things that these organizations who are standing against Israel do is make us believe the lie that we are lone voices. They're very intimidating, they're very violent, they're very rough. They make us believe that we are standing alone, but we're not. There's more of us than them, actually. And then lastly, I would just like to say, as Africans, Isaiah 18 lets us know that there's a promise for us as Christians. As African Christians, the book of Isaiah, chapter 18 says that Africans will bring a gift to the Lord in Zion. There are people who are trying to stop us accessing this promise from the Lord. Let us not allow them to do so. So please, guys, sign up, spread the word, flood social media. This is a serious, serious threat, not just to Israel, but to our faith as Christians. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Very powerful, and we really appreciate you giving us your insight as a member of not the Jewish community, but someone who understands this issue extremely well, and really such a powerful view. If you are a Christian Zionist listening to this, I'm going to put Pam's email address in the comments section, Pam, with permission, because we'd really love to get your organizations to also be behind this. Obviously, your members as well, but I do think that we need to have as many organizations stand with us on this, if you're willing. So I have put Pam's email in. Please feel free to be in touch if you want to engage Safi on this. Then last speaker for the evening, a man who is very much well known for this work and to this community and around the world, and has been in many ways some of the lone voice, certainly in our parliament sometimes, and on the world stage in different places and different ways. He is Dr. Kenneth MESHOE, and he is MESHOE, excuse me, and he is joining us tonight to give us his perspective. Reverend, is your camera on so that we can see you?
Well, it says the host has muted it. I'm trying to unmute.
Terribly sorry. Give me one moment.
we're just going to see how we can get the technical problem.
There you go.
Rev, try it now.
Talk to the host. If you are the host, do something again.
All right, we're just going to try and fix that for them in a moment. We do apologize for that, Reverend. Reverend, do you perhaps all right, well, let's see. There we are. We've got you there. Thank you. And you can see us and you can hear us, Reverend.
Well, I can see you. I'm not sure whether you can see me.
We can see you. We can hear you clearly. Reverend MESHOE from the African Christian Democratic Party, Hope and Glory Tabernacle up here in Gauteng. Rev, what do you have to say to us on this evening?
Well, firstly, a big thank you to Anne and to Olga, our great ladies that side. And to you also, Benji, for chairing this session. I'm not going to be long. Maybe I'll say 3 or 4 things. Firstly, we are facing a war that is winnable if all of us spoke and acted like people who believe that they can win the war. We definitely can. When you see a soldier walking in the streets during wartime, dragging his feet, looking apologetic, you cannot expect much from such a soldier or from such a person. And I think many times Jews and Christians alike, they seem to be apologetic. They are not as confident as their enemies. But I must say that we are better equipped because we operate from love and not from hatred. And there's no way that hatred can beat love if those with love can show the love. There's no way that darkness can beat light if those who are walking in the light can make their light shine. I have a sense that a number of our people are easily intimidated. We should refuse to be intimidated by these guys. There are things that we need to correct as people who love Israel and who acknowledge the fact that it is the responsibility of every responsible government to defend its citizens. When people keep quiet, when Hamas attacks Israel, and when Israel responds, then they scream, disproportionate response. We need to speak out as those who are supporting Israel, the right of Israel to defend herself. We need to revisit our strategies. Our strategies are not as well funded as those who hate Israel. My perception is those who hate Israel spend much to work towards the destruction of Israel. And we don't seem to be spending as much as the enemies of Israel to defend Israel. Our coordinators and the programs of those who want to defend Israel. Have I gone underground, or is it technology?
Now we hear you. We hear you, Reverend.
You can hear me? All right. We should make sure that our strategies are well known, and we should do our best to ensure that we increase the presence of those who love Israel. Start chapters, new chapters on universities. You go to many universities, don't see anything or any group of people that love Israel speaking out. But those who hate Israel, they are in every campus. So you ask the question, what is the problem? Is it coordination, poor coordination, or lack of funding? And I think sometimes it's both. We need to put our money where our mouth is. Ensure that we have educational programs that will be able to reach all university students, in particular, who need knowledge about what's happening in the Middle East. I can assure you that the majority of South Africans love Israel. The previous speaker spoke about, Pamela spoke about churches, charismatic churches. I would not focus on Pentecostal or evangelical churches. The majority of what's called Zionist churches, they have the word Zion somewhere. They love the word Zion. They are Zionists. They are called the Zionists, even though some of them don't know much about Israel, but they are known as Zionists. So those people are ripe to be harvested. They are ripe to be harvested. So if information could be given to such people, this is what's happening to Israel. The UN is biased, and yet they claim to be promoting peace and security in the country when they are part of the problem. And I think if we do not address the problem and confront the problem, we'll not be able to solve our problem. A wrong diagnosis will always lead to a wrong prescription. So I am suggesting that we need to say it loudly. I don't mind saying it. I can say it in parliament. I can say it in every street corner that the UN is a problem. The UN is a problem. Now, for a person like Navi Pillay to be elected to a position that requires an impartial and objective person, when it is known that she's neither impartial nor objective, and the UN is not challenged, I think we need to do a little bit more than we have done so. UN is a problem. And until they are told in their face, you are the problem in the Middle East will not be solved. The UN needs to take their position as facilitators of peace, because now they are not the facilitators of peace because they are anti-Israel. They've taken sides against Israel. This might be discouraging for a person who is not aware of the strength that we have within us. But as I close, I want to say, we are facing a war that is winnable. Let's relook at our strategies. Let's look at our coordinators. Who's coordinating? Let's look at our presence on institutions of higher learning. Let's look at our opponents. You know, I heard something very interesting that maybe I need to share with you as I close about soccer. You know, I love soccer. And African competition just came to an end now. They said the goalkeeper of Senegal, after the match, after they won the match, he was so excited, he forgot a bottle he had with him near the goalposts. What was in that bottle? That bottle had a number of players who are known to be taking penalties. He made time to study their methodologies, their strategy. How do they kick the ball? Now, if they can take a penalty, how do they do that? He studied their moves, and they say he saved 8 penalties during the competition. He saved 8. Why? Because he made the time to learn and to observe the strategy of his opponents. So if these guys, the enemies of Israel, can have a presence in all campuses, why can't we do the same? What's the problem? So my conclusion, as I thank you one more time, Anne and Olga, for this webinar, let us revisit our strategy. We must win this war. We must expose the UN. And we must let people know that most South Africans, most Africans, except obviously in countries that are Islamic, they support Israel. Let that support become hot bodies. Let that support be seen. Thank you very much. And I hope that our coordinators will do a little more to tell us how are they improving.
Certainly they'll do more with that inspired address. And just, I mean, you know, I sort of maybe wanted to laugh a little bit, but, you know, it's such a serious issue. Just and also because we had a question of a university student here, and I hope this university student is inspired to stand up for themselves on campuses, regardless of who they are. But just one sentence or two sentences, as someone who did suffer under apartheid, what is your sense as a South African about where this is going for our history?
Rev, you're on mute.
My apology. Firstly, if Israel was an apartheid state, comparing Israel to South Africa, then I don't believe that South Africa would be where it is today with apartheid as it was properly defined, because the word apartheid comes from South Africa. So those outside there who want to play on the emotions of people and talking about apartheid, they need to talk as people who are black. Do you know that there was a time during apartheid when South African citizens were divided into 4 groups? The first group was white. Then you had coloreds. Colored was a mixture of black and white. Then you had Indian. Then at the bottom was black, like myself. Navi Pillay was number 3, was above me. You need to know that Navi Pillay did not experience what I, as a black man, experienced. She had privileges I did not have. So I know better about the pain of apartheid than Navi Pillay. And this I can say to her in her face. She's lying. I can tell in her face she's lying. So the main reason why apartheid in South Africa was so evil and had to be fought and opposed, something that caused Nelson Mandela to become a household name. Mandela wanted the right to vote, number 1. The right to go where he wanted to study, medication, education. He wanted the same rights as a white person. Mandela wanted to live where he wanted to live. If in South Africa we had what the Palestinians have right now, Palestinians in Israel, I promise you, the world would not have known about Mandela. There would not have been any need for an armed struggle, because they have the right to vote, they have the right to move, freedom of movement, except obviously the terrorists. I would act against the terrorists as even the Israeli leaders are acting against them. It is proper because their responsibility is to protect their citizens. But the rights they have, we don't have in South Africa. You know, the first time I went to Israel, my eyes were wide open, looking for non-white signs or white-only signs. I visited the schools. I saw Palestinian Arab teachers teaching Jewish children. It will never happen in South Africa. I went to the hospitals. I saw Arab doctors nursing Jewish. It would have never happen in South Africa. A black person could not teach a white person anything. You could not, if you are a doctor, there was a time when black people were not allowed even to be doctors. They were not allowed. So I'm saying, people who are saying Israel is an apartheid state, when the Arabs have all the privileges that the Jews have, those people are lying. They must ask people like ourselves who were told you cannot go there because of the color of your skin. You cannot attend the school. You cannot tell a white man what's right and what's wrong. You cannot do all those things. So Israel is not an apartheid state. That word is used just to play with the emotions of people, to get sympathy for the poor, for the Palestinians. But apartheid, there is no apartheid there. I've been in Israel more than 20 times, and I'm hoping to go there again next year. There is no apartheid in Israel. So it's a lie.
Well, Rev, you certainly didn't disappoint with that answer, and we also know why you're now so effective both in Parliament and on a Sunday morning at the Sermon. So thank you once again for your time. We always appreciate your support. Thank you to all of our panelists, to Pamela, to Olga, and of course to Anne, who's joining us all the way from New York. I really think it's been an inspiring event from a perspective of really understanding the threats. And once again, if I can say to people, please do go to Anne's website, contact us at SAF, South African Friends of Israel, or at the South African Zionist Federation. We need to raise our voices. And as someone put at the bottom in one of the chats, that for evil to persist, we just need good people to do nothing, and we have a chance to do something. We have a chance to say that this thing is not going to be passed in our name as South Africans. So please do join us in this program. You can see all of the information in the chat, but you can also be part of it, and you will be getting a lot of interaction from us in the coming weeks as we mobilize towards this effort. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to everyone for being part of this call and for being part of the pro-Israel community in South Africa that is working every single day to make sure not just that our country is on the right side of the future, but that the whole world is as well. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to our whole team who helped put it together tonight, Lisa and David, who always do such a great job, and all the people in the Zionist Federation office. And we hope to be seeing you all on a webinar, but hopefully also in person coming up soon. There's many great days in terms of Yom Ha'atzmaut and celebrations about what Israel is all about coming up this year. So we do hope that you can be a part of it. And yeah, thank you very much for your time, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benji. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Very well done. Wow. Amazing, amazing. We ran a bit long, but too good to stop. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to end the meeting very soon. Just give you one last moment to say goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks all. Fantastic.
So
I really
much.
appreciate it.
Awesome. Good night, and God bless everyone.
Night,
Yeah.
everybody.
Good night.